Please join me in welcoming Or from Akamai. Take it away.
Thank you. My name is Or Katz, and I'm from Akamai, as it was just mentioned. And I'm going to talk to you today about creating data-driven threat intelligence signals in zero trust environment. But before doing that, I have a question to you. Where were you on November 27? And before you answer, and I see that you are very eager to answer that question, keep that in mind. I will tell you where I was in November 27. And I'll give some context to that. Prior to November, I moved to the US, and I woke up on the morning of the November 27, and I took my bag, went to work, got into the office, and it was something like that. It was pretty empty. There were some employees, but it was pretty empty. So I went into one of my colleagues. His name is Mick. He's a Scottish dude. And I asked him, Mick, where's everybody? And Mick, with his brilliant Scottish accent, which I will try to mimic, but I will probably miss that, told me that only foreigners come to work today. So that was a big news to me, because there are two things that I learned from that, or two things that highlight some of my thoughts. The first one is the first time ever that I'm being classified as foreigner. And the second thought was, wait, it's a working day. I'm working with a lot of my colleagues, but they are not at work. I'm communicating with them. It's a working day, no doubt about it. So what really happens behind the scene? And in order to answer that question, what I was doing was going into some of the data that we have in Akamai, which is data that is associated with zero trust environments and the access to those environments, and I queried that data. And this is what I was able to see. This is the graph that represents what I was able to see. And blue means working day, green means weekends, and the orange one means the Thanksgiving. So the 27th was the day before Thanksgiving. Few things that while looking into this graph, caught my eye. The first one is that people are still being connected to enterprise applications over weekends, which is a bit surprising, but not. I don't know about you, but I have the tendency to sometimes be connected over weekends. My wife don't approve that always, but I'm still doing that from time to time. Don't tell her. And the second thing is that the Thanksgiving amount of users accessing enterprise applications is even higher than weekends, which is, again, a bit surprising to the fact that people are still need to be connected over holidays and weekends. Now, the interesting part, and the thing that I want to focus on, was the days of the 27th and 26th. The 27th was the day that I got to the office and it was empty, but people were still working. The 26th was the day prior to that, where I was in the office and all the people were in the office, which was a different day. So I wanted to compare those 2 days. So I looked into the data that's relevant to those 2 days, and these are the things that I was able to see. Now, when you look on those US maps, and I didn't mention that, but the focus was on US users trying to access enterprise applications. So on the 26th, what I was able to see is that there are 5% more of users being connected to enterprise application, which is explainable because I would imagine a lot of people taking a day off on the 27th just before Thanksgiving. When looking on the 27th, on the other hand, we can see that there are 8% more access city, meaning there are more cities that we can see users access from those cities into enterprise application, right? Which is, again, represent what I was seeing in the office. And when we combine those data points together, we have a 50% change between those 2 days in terms of normalized density, meaning on the 27, there's much more density in terms of accessibility to enterprise application. Now, we talked about accessibility, right? But what happens when it comes to adversary? What happens on those same days in terms of attacks and users being attacked? So we also got into some of the data that we have related to phishing attacks. And these are the number of victims for phishing attacks on the same time frame between November 11 to December 8, the same time frame that we looked into as an axis. Now, few things that you can see on that graph and I can explain. The first thing is that threat actors are not resting over weekends and holidays, which is, again, not surprising, but that represents the fact that while we are being connected, while we are not in our network, the same time frame is being targeted by threat actors and try to compromise us. The second trend that I was able to see is the fact that there is a soaring trend in the amount of victims over and during the holiday season. And that can also be explained by the fact that that time frame is a very vulnerable time frame in terms of people wanting to have more access to coupons and all kind of trends that are relevant to holiday season. And therefore, that's the time that threat actors are much more active and creating much more damage. Specifically, in order to explain that trend, we looked into the targeted brands. What are the brands that are mostly being abused over that time frame, and what created that trend of the amount of victims? And what we were able to see is that the e-commerce brands are the ones that are mostly being targeted over that time frame, which can also be explained by events such as Cyber Monday and Black Friday, which are, again, shopping-related events that created the incentives for creating those threats. Now, here are the three takeaways that I have from what I just told you. The first one, the concept of network parameter is loosely defined. We see that people need and want to be connected. They want to do that from their own devices. They want to do that by their roaming devices. And the fact that we are captured into the concept of parameter, it's loosely defined, and there are no parameter out there. Consumer threats are as irrelevant as enterprise threats, right? So, and I want to explain that because I was questioned that question many times this year. When we talk about phishing, a lot of people tend to think that it's a consumer kind of attack. And my notion on that is two things. First of all, well, it's true, a lot of phishing attacks are targeting consumers' data. But at the same time, if the same device is being connected to your enterprise network, and that same device is being victimized for phishing attacks, there's no question about it. That device is compromised, and you need to treat that device the same way. Now, more to that, when we did some research in Akamai concerning phishing attacks, we were able to, well, we took over 200,000 URLs, and we checked what is the actual target of those URLs, who are the victims of those URLs, and we were able to see that over 34% of those URLs are actually targeting enterprise credentials. Which means, well, phishing is not a consumer kind of attack, and more to that, we need to treat it as well. Now, the last takeaway was, and that's a trivial thing, people are wanting to have the ability to connect anywhere at any time from any device, right? That's the reality. We cannot change it. That the user needs to be connected, and we need to react upon that. And a conclusion of that for me was, okay, so when we talk about perimeter-driven intelligence, we are talking about threat intel, and we are more focused on detection and mitigation of the threats. While we move into the zero trust architecture, we need to change our focus. We need to do what I call at least trust intelligence, where we need to be focused on the entities that are being connected, users and assets. And we need to determine the trust level for each of those entities. Now, what does it mean, trust level, right? There are 50 shades of trust, and I'll ask you a few questions about it, right? So if someone is connected to one of our enterprise applications at the same time that he's browsing through a, well, badly reputed network, right? He's using some Wi-Fi network that has bad reputation. Do we trust that user? I don't know. Well, what about that user that is using a variety of networks, such as Tor networks, or downloading files from Bit networks, or stuff like that? Do we trust that user? I don't know. So there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. For example, about the device. What if the device that we are using is not fully patched? It's not running the most updated OS version, or the browser is not fully patched, right? Or the certificates that are being used are not most up to date. Do we trust that user? So at the end of the day, it's all a level of trust, and trust have different levels. And that actually led me to the understanding that what we need to do is to define the trust level and apply the relevant security policy based on that level with the associated action. And an important note about it, when we talk about action, action is something in the context of trust and risk. We can say risk and trust. It's very similar in that sense, is that we need to apply actions that will do two things. First of all, we'll reduce the level of risk, and at the same time, we'll create a situation of which users can still connect to enterprise applications. Right? They need to have accessibility. We cannot block them. And this is my solution for that. And it's a signal-based approach that has 3 steps: data, signals, and actions. The first step is data. You need to have a variety of data sources. Those data sources could be malicious data sources and could be also benign associated data sources. You need to combine them both. You need to have a long duration on time frame to be able to take that data, to run algorithms on that data, to get signals out of that data. Now, what does it mean, signal? Signal can mean a lot of things, right? It can be a threat intelligence signal as we know that today. Antivirus kind of signals, malicious known traffic is a signal. Signal could be also browsing habits, as I mentioned before. It could be someone that is browsing to adult content or peer-to-peer downloads, which is associated with a lot of malicious activity. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it means that there's something associated with that create more risk. What about the device posture? As I mentioned, versioning of the OS, the browser, etc. Connectivity, Wi-Fi network, airports, these are signals that we need to use. Geographic is also a signal. What if someone changes location? What's the meaning of that in terms of trust? We'll talk about that a bit more. Now, when we move into actions, where I call it trust soft action, and as I said before, it needs to be an action that can enable us to reduce the risk, but at the same time, should not prevent accessibility to enterprise applications. A few examples for that, for such actions, could be multi-factor authentication, right? If someone is changing his location, right, and it could be the result of some compromised credential being used in the wild, we should not block that user. That doesn't mean that something wrong happened, but that means that there is some risk and there is a trust issue that needs to be dealt. And therefore, multi-factor authentication can help in those cases. We can do limiting access. We can limit access in terms of which application should be accessed. For example, if some of the applications are very private or contain some private information, therefore we should not enable access to those applications to users that are associated with trust issues or risk issues. We can also use all kind of challenging and deception kind of techniques to make sure that the user is not compromised. Sending a challenge to the user will create a situation where we check if the user is genuine and authentic, and at the same time, we should not create any significant impact to the user accessibility. Now, here is an example for that. And let's take the geographic data as a source of data that can help us tell this story. And it's known that geographic data is not source of data that's usually being used for threat intelligence, for the obvious reason. As I mentioned before, if someone changes location, that's something that we could not take a binary decision based on that. We cannot block that user just because we saw some anomaly that related to geographic. But in the context of zero trust, we can do more than that. We have a data. We see a pattern of user, how he connects, where he connects, what's the time frame of him connecting. Let's see that we see anomaly of that. So we created signal based on that. And we can take that signal and combine that with a lot of other signals that we have. And you can choose the signal that you want to use, obviously. And then we move it into the action. And when it comes to action, at those cases, we can do a multi-factor authentication or limit some of the user accessibility to some of the enterprise application. We can also do some reduction of the amount of data that can be downloaded. For example, if you have an application that is being used to download files, once you identify some risky or user with trust issues, you can limit the amount of files or data being downloaded from that application, and by that, reduce the risk associated with those users. Now, let's try to summarize what I was showing you here today. So the first thing is, where do you imagine I will be on November 27, 2020? And the answer for that is no, I will be at work. There's no doubt about it. But here are some serious takeaways that I would like you to take from here. First of all, we can see that attackers are not taking vacation, right? While we are at one point of time are working from home or working outside of the office, threat actors are not resting and exposing a lot of risk to us, to our users, and as derived from that to our application and our data. And we need to be ready on those occasions as well. I'm suggesting moving from a threat intel point of view into a trust intel point of view, where the focus will be around the entities, which are the users and the assets that you have in the organization. In order to do that, I'm suggesting a three-step solution that take into consideration the data, the signals, and the action, combining them together into creating a solution that can help mitigate some of those problems. And when we look into the future of network, of enterprise network, I think that there is no future, it's the present. As we saw here today, people need and want to be connected at any time from any device, from anywhere. And we need to be able to solve that kind of issues or risks that are associated with those situations. It's not the future. Zero trust is the present. That's how people use application, and we need to be able to react on that, and we need to be able to reduce the risk that is associated with that. That's all from me today. Just before we are going to the Q&A, I will introduce myself because I was not doing that at the beginning. I'm a former OWASP Israel chapter lead. In the past year, I've gone fishing. I was doing a lot of research related to fishing and published a lot of that research, and will be publish some research in the following month. And I'm a big fan of white whales. I hope you enjoyed the talk. If you have any question, I'm here to answer. Thank you.